So that we can start with the program for the morning. If we could all settle down. Let me take this opportunity to welcome everyone who has taken time to join us on this beautiful Johannesburg morning. This is the 5th edition of the Google Africa Internet Academy hosted by the University of Johannesburg Center for Data and Digital Communication together with the Artificial Institute of Intelligence here at the Johannesburg Business School. A special word of welcome to the university's Management Executive Committee led by Professor Khan, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor responsible for academics. She is representing our Vice Chancellor, Professor Litlogwa George Mpedi, who could not be with us this morning. Let me also take this opportunity to welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Moneni Muefe. I hope your surname always dribbles me. Moneni, I'm just going to call you Moneni because it's fine to be on the first name basis. He's the Deputy Director General in the Department of Science and Innovation. He is representing both the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, Dr. Blade Nzimande, who is in Parliament for a very important task this morning, as well as the Director General for Department of Science and Innovation, Dr. Phil Mjwacha. Our partners from Google, from all over the world, they are here with us this morning. A special word of welcome to our South African team, led by Dr. Alistair Mkwena, who is the Country Director for Google South Africa. Of course, our host here at the JBS, led by Dean Professor Randall Carlson. Our warm welcome. All our speakers are here, I've seen them. Dr. Jason Hickey, who is the head of Google Research in Ghana, Accra. He is representing Yossi Matias, who is the Vice President for Engineering and Research from Google, who could not join us this morning. And all other speakers, you are warm welcome. Of course, this event would have not been possible without the special delegates, all of you who are here, especially those who are coming from afar, who have joined us this morning. We really appreciate your presence. The Google Africa Internet Academy is indeed one of the premier annual events on the continent that brings together business and technology leaders from across Africa. I think the bathrooms are outside somewhere. So if you can, if nature calls, I'm sure you could be assisted if you could do so as quietly as possible without disturbing the proceedings. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get going with our program. Let me now invite Professor Khan, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academic, to give us a word of welcome. But let me introduce you, Professor Khan, briefly, that one of the important things I think that this audience needs to know that you serve as a member of various societies in the field of microbiology and virology, including being a member for the Research and Innovation Committee for Development of the 5th National Development Plan for Namibia. It will be interesting to see how you intend to infuse AI into the field of microbiology and virology. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to Professor Khan.
As I was preparing this, I thought you would all judge me because I have paper and I don't have a device. And now I realize you're judging me because I have a Samsung. Sincere apologies. Good morning, everyone. Before I start, I just want to relay our regret on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Letlhoko Mpedi. He couldn't be here today. He is traveling, but he wanted us to just, on his behalf, he wanted me to share some welcoming remarks and just say that in his opinion, and I'm sure it's shared with many of our MEC members as well, that this event is certainly the highlight on the UJ calendar. So it's with regret that he couldn't be here. I was going to say all protocol observed, but I have a long list of people that I have to welcome, so please allow me to do so. To Mr. Mboneni Mwefe, Deputy Director General, Department of Science and Technology. I also have Senator Shoaib Afolabi Saliso from the Ogun Central Senatorial District within the Republic of Nigeria. I have the Honorable Suleiman Shabal, who is the East Africa Legislative Assembly member and chairman of the Communications, Trade and Investment Committee in Kenya. I have Dr. Alistair Mkwena, who is the country director, Google South Africa, but I prefer to think of you as a council member for the University of Johannesburg, Alistair. We also have Charles Morito. And Charles, if I could just get, Charles Morito is the Director, Sub-Saharan Africa, Government Affairs and Public Policy. Welcome. I've got Dr. Jason Hickey, Head of Google Research, Accra. Dr. Randall Carolison, Dean, Johannesburg Business School here at the University of Johannesburg and one of the co-hosts. Executive deans, I haven't seen many executive deans, but I did see that they are part of the attendance list. So I'm thinking that they will possibly be joining us through the course of the next few days. Senior leaders and staff of the university, staff of Google as well, invited speakers, distinguished guests, students, all who have joined us. Sanibonani, goeiemorgen, good morning to Bella. Now I think those coming after me can say all protocol observed, because that was an exhaustive list, you have to agree. On behalf of the University of Johannesburg, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the Google Africa Internet Academy. We are truly honored to be the official academic partner of this event, introducing Google Artificial Intelligence to policymakers. I think we can all agree that the impact on AI on our lives is no longer a question to consider for the future. Instead, it is a reality that we contend with daily. As an academic, as an example, the emergence of ChatGPT in late 2022 is an example in the forefront of my mind related to the disruptive potential of generative AI, or AI. It was clear from the start that this powerful tool will have far-reaching implications for education. As technologies such as ChatGPT are integrated into our lives, terms such as generative AI are increasingly included in the everyday vocabulary of not just educational leaders of computer science or information systems, but educational leaders within humanities, within law, within health sciences. All of us are familiar and we are using these terms on the daily. When ChatGPT was launched, institutions scrambled to grapple with the implications. And I want to share with you that UJ was no different. When ChatGPT was launched, the first thing we did was we placed the topic in almost all of our on the agenda of all of our institutional meetings. And we said, do you know what it can do? Do you understand the implications for assessment? And then we sat back and we thought about it. And we said, yes, there are implications for assessment. But if we are assessing in that type of way where ChatGPT can aid a student, maybe we need to rethink the way that we are assessing. So from that perspective, our Division of Teaching Excellence really did an outstanding job. They brought together, or they constructed 3 practice guides. A practice guide for students, a practice guide for staff, and a practice guide that just basically provided the information and the literature on generative AI. And what our academic entities are now doing is they are developing position papers. So they are taking that information and they're saying, right, let's determine what our position would be and how we are going to incorporate the generative AI to enhance and augment what we do, rather than thinking of it with a red light. There must be amber and there must be green light ways that we can also incorporate. Transformational and seemingly overnight disruption is really not actually unexpected, because we have made leading Africa into the 4th industrial revolution core to our business. In the South African higher education system, we are known for our forward-looking focus on 4IR, a revolution which by its very nature is characterized by disruptive technologies that change how people live and how people work. We have taken strategic focus seriously over the past years by applying our minds to the intellectual and practical challenges of 4IR, investing resources in establishing structures to respond, lead, and educate our students and the broader community about the new realities we all need to adapt to. The reason I spoke about the executive deans earlier is because I want to use the opportunity to provide to you some examples about how we thought it important to educate our professions, our students, and our staff about AI and the impact of AI. But what I'm going to present is but a drop in the ocean. And I wanted to encourage you to have a conversation for those who are in the faculties. I see Palani and Komazepi here from Health Sciences, And he'll be able to share with you how they use VR and AR in human anatomy and physiology. I also saw a representative from the Faculty of Science, and they will be able to share all the short learning programs and the forensic science that they use and how they use simulation or AI and VR within their science faculty. So if you have an opportunity and you happen to run into an executive dean or a representative from the faculties, have a conversation with them. Because what I'm going to talk about is but a drop in the bucket. Please chat with them so that they can share. That this particular master's allow us to graduate students who are developed in skills, who are highly competent, and they are able to work with cutting-edge AI applications and concepts, again, across various fields, not just in one particular field, but also the promotion of multidisciplinary fields. Across our faculties, we are working to educate professionals through short learning programs. The School of Accounting created a short learning program for professionals in business concerning artificial intelligence. As the world changes, there is a risk that professionals in to AI for healthcare professionals. In 2018, UJ introduced an AI module called Artificial Intelligence in 4IR for all of its students. And this is an example, or one of the examples, of our institutional MOOCs. The module covers what is AI, what can it do, how is it used, and what are the implications of AI. And if you look at the course descriptor, then the course descriptor provides, the course will not teach you how to code, but it will show you how you can expect AI to impact your life. Recognizing that AI impacts our communities and the broader public, UJ decided to make the material of the institutional MOOC available to the general public as well. And that is at no cost. And so you don't need a particular entry requirement to complete the institutional MOOC, and it's at no cost. But I want to share that this is not the only institutional MOOC we have. Currently, we actually have 4 institutional MOOCs that they are covering an array of topics. And I like to categorize the topics into 2 topics. I think of one of them or some of them as skills development, and I think of others as edifying. So it's those types of MOOCs that you do because you want to broaden your knowledge and your information rather than skills. So those are the MOOCs that we have. We are developing 6 further MOOCs. And so by 2024, we will have 10 institutional MOOCs that will be available on a storefront at no cost for no entry requirements. So we encourage you to come and visit our website and see what kind of skills development or edifying SLPs or MOOCs you can come and register for. But I also wanted to share, it's not only our academic entities that are doing absolutely a brilliant job by adopting AI technologies or technologies. Our registrar's office, I don't know how many of you are familiar with I was just speaking to Alistair, and he was talking about some of the, Alistair, I'm not going to reveal where, but some of the teething experiences he has because he's just decided to complete a 2nd doctorate. And so he's experienced some of teething problems where administration is concerned. And so from our perspective, we recognize that. And so our registrar's office has really been, in my opinion, a flagship example of how they have adopted, adapted, incorporated technologies to make their service that much better for the student, which is our client, of course. So when you complete a MOOC, you are provided with a digital certificate, and this is one of the examples. The Registrar's Office has developed a digital certificate platform, and this is the same for when you complete any qualification here at UJ as well. And so third parties or future employers are able to log in and they are able to view your digital certificate. And it's no different for if you complete the MOOC as well. More recently, in 2022, the Artificial Intelligence Institute of South Africa was established as one of the outcomes of the Presidential Commission on the 4th Industrial Revolution. It is a collaboration between the National Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, UJ and Tshwane University of Technology, as an innovation engine for public and private sectors in line with the Presidential Commission. And if you look at the agenda over the next 2 days, then you'll notice that many of the people as part of the AIISA are presenting, and they are providing some of the work, the excellent work that they are completing as part of this particular group. Although we are excited about all the work at UJ, we do not see ourselves in isolation from industry and policy-level trends and developments. The increased global adoption of AI across all sectors has fast-tracked the need for conversation between diverse stakeholders to look at AI benefits and the potential risks. This is why your conversation over the next 2 days are truly critical. Artificial intelligence is changing our human experience of the world. It has the capacity to enable current and future generations to live in a more prosperous, healthy, secure, and sustainable world. Yet amid these opportunities, there are real risks, challenges, and ethical questions that we need to put on the table and we need to deliberate. AI brings with it privacy and security concerns. We have questions about the collection and the use of personal information. Through AI, there is an increased opportunity to potentially spread illegal. Simply stated, AI's impact on society is deep and it is pervasive. It is our job to work towards ensuring that AI plays a role in creating the world we want to live in and minimizing the risks and the negative unintended consequences. The uncomfortable reality is that AI systems are potentially reproducing rather than resolving the inequalities that exist within our society. So what do I mean when I say that? Most AI data is used, or most AI is trained using data gathered in the perceived higher socio-economic areas. Therefore, it does not work optimally when these devices, or it may not, let me rather cover myself and say, it may not work optimally when these devices are used in variant socio-economic areas that are not well represented in the data sets used to train the machines. We should train AI systems to reflect the reality as we plan, rather than the reality as it exists. At UJ, our strategic focus on GES, Global Excellence and Stature 4.0, with societal impact, is a means to create a world we could all be proud to live in. It is a means to a world where no child needs to go to bed without a roof over their head, 3D printing of housing. One with more efficient transport and energy systems that do not harm the planet, electrical buses. A world where the quality education that is future forward is the norm and not linked to the exception. In this world, advancement and technology are inextricably linked. As we strive for more and greater technological achievements, we cannot lose sight of the need to emphasize humanity in our approach. Our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Letlokwa Mpedi, has articulated a vision for UJ that emphasizes continuity, innovation, humanity, inclusivity, and purposeful progress as prerequisite guiding principles for societal impact. Alongside our commitment to excellence and innovation, Professor Mpedi challenges us to emphasize humanity in our approach by embedding the concept of Ubuntu and a human-centric approach into our efforts. He stated at his inauguration, and please allow me to quote, "As we continue to make strides with technology, we must do so in a way that advances and positively impacts humanity and society," end of quote. Our approach echoes the words of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres at an AI for Good summit in July this year, where he stated that AI for the good of all requires a framework grounded in human rights, transparency, and accountability. The benefits of AI cannot be realized, and the risks cannot be addressed or mitigated by a single stakeholder. It truly needs to be a multi-stakeholder approach. And that is why the Google Academy presents an opportunity for industry, for academics and for government to sit around a table together to debate and to learn from each other. As you deliberate how to adopt and implement a responsible approach to AI and how to develop relevant policies, I urge you not to forget the fundamental principle that technology should be the enabler that makes eliminating inequality in all of its forms possible. We have all failed if the outcome is greater and more deeply entrenched inequality. Thank you for the opportunity to welcome you all here today, and I trust the Academy will yield insightful proposals for moving us forward collectively. I thank you, Ria Leboga, Niabonga, baie dankie.
Thank you very much, Professor Khan, for those very detailed words of welcome. With part of them are marching orders for us as to what we need to consider going forward. Without wasting any time, let me welcome the Country Director for Google South Africa, Dr. Alistair Mokoena, soon to be Dr. Alistair Mokoena, to give us his words of welcome on behalf of Google. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Prof. Mandla. Prof. Mandla and I go back a long way. In my relationship with Prof. Randall, who runs the business school, we also go back a long way. I was one of the founding members of the advisory board here at the business school. And as Professor Khan said, I do sit on the council, and I am a professor of practice here, because we as Google see this partnership with academic institutions as sacrosanct. We have our finger on the pulse when it comes to research. We have our finger on the pulse in terms of the role that technology plays in driving equality in society, the role that technology plays in making the 17 SDG goals a reality in our lifetime, the role that technology plays in unleashing the imagination of society. We as Google are celebrating 25 years on the 27th of September this year. And it's a formidable journey. It's a journey that was basically started by two individuals at university who said, what if we organized the world's information and made it accessible and helpful to society? And this what if question is at the heart of Google's investment in technology. Take search, for example. Search was birthed out of a what if conversation. What if we indexed all the websites in the world and make them accessible? All that you need to do as a user is punch in your keyword, your search word, and then you'll be served with a relevant and appropriate response. The website that speaks to your search will come up. And then we said, what if we made it easy for everybody in the world to travel, to find their way around? And that's how Google Maps was actually birthed, to really make it easy to connect people from one place to another in the most efficient and in the most effective way. And now we've also introduced more technology into search and into Google Maps and into all our other products to make them much more responsive to society's needs, even reducing carbon footprint through Google Maps and giving you the most fuel efficient route from point A to point B. And then we said, what if we created a platform where anybody could create anything and share it with anybody in the world? Enter YouTube. So the list is endless. And if I look at the world of AI today, it has to be prefaced with responsible AI. AI is by far the most exciting technology we have today at our disposal. It can transform the world. It's bigger than the internet itself. It can be a force for good, but let's not forget that in this ecosystem, there are bad actors with nefarious aims who might repurpose this amazing technology for negative ends. So we have to ensure that as we roll out more and more research, more and more technology in the responsible AI space, it has to be safe for society, it has to be beneficial to society, it has to drive equality in society, it has to be rooted in facts, it must be backed up by credible sources, because let's face it, one of the biggest enemies today is misinformation, disinformation, and fake news. So we're really thrilled about this partnership with University of Johannesburg. In fact, when South Africa decided to launch an AI institute, it looked no further than University of Johannesburg as the first AI hub, which is situated here. And then, of course, down the road, technology, TUT, Tshwane University of Technology, being the second AI hub for the country. But also, I sit on the Institute for Intelligent Systems at UJ, and I can tell you this university is the preeminent institution when it comes to 4IR. Into this space, you will hear all about the programs that are coming up, but whether you think of food security through tech, whether you think of financial inclusion through fintech, whether you think of AI and healthcare and so on, it is all there, it's all coming, even in the area of fighting crime, but also in the exciting possibility of e-government across the continent. We have to get to a point where all the 54 nations in Africa are built on e-government, where service delivery becomes commonplace for everybody, where efficiency of governance becomes table stakes, where we all have a single digital identity, where we have a huge single digital market, and of course the role of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area in developing protocols to ensure that e-commerce becomes a reality and anybody on the continent can trade with anybody in the world without local currency being a barrier, without language being a barrier, without access to technology being a barrier, without prohibitive internet costs being a barrier. So we partner with governments to shine a spotlight on the role that technology can actually play in lifting all lives and really in being the tide that lifts all boats. So I want to encourage you to enjoy the next 2 days. It's going to be fantastic. Hold on tight to your seats. The speed is going to be incredible, but we really thank you, and we welcome all our friends across the continent, Karibu, Cabo, so yeah, thank you so much. And Prof. Mandla, thank you for hosting today's proceedings, and we wish you well over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alistair, for those words, and we really thank you for the support that you have given us as a university over the years. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, we've been welcomed, we can now settle down and begin with the proceedings. We're now going to have the keynote address by Mr. Mboneni Muefe, who is the Deputy Director General for Technology and Innovation at the Department of Science and Innovation in South Africa. Mboneni was previously the DDG responsible for international cooperation and funds to support South Africa's science system and the department's partnership with multinational companies. But most importantly, Mboneni is currently responsible, or responsibilities include overseeing the implementation of South Africa's space science and technology strategy, the bioeconomy strategy, the energy research and technology strategy, innovation priorities, instruments, which include new research areas and oversight of the IP Act. Ladies and gentlemen, please put our hands together for Mboneni.
I have to adjust this microphone. Part of being 4IR compliant is that we need to be miniature. Thanks very much, Prof, for the welcome and for the effective program directing. Professor Khan, thanks. I think some of the issues that you have raised cannot be disputed in terms of how this is relevantly hosted and partnered with the University of Johannesburg, because we see you as that university that is going to, or that has taken the lead. Dr. Mkwena, thanks very much. I think everybody here really appreciates Google. I have to interact with Google every day. And even when I haven't asked to interact with Google, it decides it wants to interact with me. I get into my car, and part of his machine learning just knew that I'm starting at the gym, and it says you've got 5 minutes to reach the gym and the traffic is good. So I just follow that. I think that's really just the power of technological developments, and how when we talk about 4IR and indeed artificial intelligence and machine learning, we're moving into that world where life has to be easy. And in it being easy, it also becomes very complicated, which is the reason why we need to continue to work in the development of these technologies, so that much of what has been seen as technology creating even bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots, that can actually be bridged. The partnership with academic institutions create that platform where we can train and develop capacity, where we can develop newer technologies to enhance what we do on a daily basis. Mention was made around the role that was played by the 4IR Commission, the Presidential Commission, which has led the process of looking at what 4IR means for our country, what it means for our continent, and what it means for our world. The one thing that we know we're dealing with in South Africa, and hence I think this is really relevant in all other developing countries, is the issue of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And this is where I think when we talk about a whole lot of things, we might be talking about artificial intelligence and people thinking IT, but we actually are talking everything. Because when we talk about food security, the way in which production is done today, and the reason why even in our own decadal plan as South Africa, as part of the implementation of the White Paper of Science, Technology and Innovation, we have identified the modernization of traditional areas of our economy, such as agriculture, as one of the things that we need to look at. Because today we need to talk about precision farming. We need to talk about how do we move away from watering the soil to watering the plants. How do we move away from applying fertilizers on the soil and applying it on the plant that actually requires it? And that level of precision is a convolution of a whole range of technologies, whether you talk about remote sensing technologies, how you're able to have, all sorts of, whether it's drone technologies, communicate with and report back to whoever is sitting in the office. So today, and working in the farm is probably hopefully going to be replaced by a young person who is sitting in their office. Cultivate, it knows exactly what to do, where to do it, where to plant, where to put the seed and water and everything. And then if there is any source of stress, that can be reported directly into someone who's sitting in the office, and they can send a drone, which drone can go and investigate whether it is drought or whether it is because some naughty moth has decided to lay the eggs on the plant, hence inducing the stress. And in response, it's either going to be a triggering of an automated irrigation or another drone that will probably go and directly spray whatever needs to be sprayed on the plant that is affected and not on the whole farm, saving money and making sure that the farmers can actually save on whatever they have to apply. We talk about the same thing when we looking at how do we modernize manufacturing. Prof, you have mentioned about the project that we working jointly with the university on the 3D printing of houses, minimizing waste, sitting and directing a machine to manufacture a house And you can then, as of today, do a 4-room house in 8 hours. And you don't find any debt lying around everywhere. The day of the launch, Prof, I need to indicate we were having a very serious heat wave. We walked into that house, and boy, it was cool. And these are some of the things that we actually need to look at. Now, there are a number of recommendations that the 4IR Commission came up with. One is that we needed to invest in human capital. We needed to establish the AI Institute, it has been mentioned. And this is really quite exciting, is that much as we have challenges of sometimes not doing things on time, when we have to do things and we have to do them, we can do them. And hence, there is somewhere where we actually need to just get our act together and do things as and when they need to be done. So the AI Institute is in place, UJ and TUT. Establish the platform for advanced manufacturing and new materials. We started talking about 3D printing of so many things. We've got a big program in the department that we're supporting around 3D manufacturing, including the 3D manufacturing of whatever replacement bony parts of the body. And the thing about modernization takes us to the challenges around AI, the issue of data. Who has the data? Who generates it? And who owns it? That brings on board a whole lot of challenges, including intellectual property issues. So we have indeed been working very hard from the Department of Science and Innovation's point of view over the years. I think even prior to this whole talk about 4IR, we had worked together with private sector to develop what we call the ICT roadmap. And as I talk to you now, we are busy looking at refocusing the initiatives that we have to look into what we call foundational digital tech capabilities research. And this is really to make sure that everything we do is grounded on science, because it's quite important. What AI does, and even what Google does for you, as Dr. Mukwena mentioned, is based on technologies that don't necessarily belong to Google. It is based on data that doesn't necessarily belong to Google. And then how do we find a way of making sure that there is that collaboration to be able to access and utilize that data in a manner that is going to benefit society? And part of that data is that it needs to be generated by us. Why are there biases in AI? It's simply because of where the data is sourced. As the African continent, we need to really develop our own databases. We need to make sure that our languages are what they should be, so that when we talk about unbiasing the biases of AI, it has to be taking information somewhere. That information, it doesn't extract it in people's brains. And when we really develop our own research programs where we train our scientists, young as they come up, they develop various databases for this and that, we are then able to do quite a lot in terms of making sure that we address some of the challenges of AI. So we have, as a department, established what we call the Center for Artificial Intelligence Research, which is distributed in a whole range of institutions, 10 established and 2 emerging research groups across 9 universities. And this is because we see that every one of our institutions, they've got different capabilities, and sometimes they are duplications. But in the end, we need to really reflect and look at ourselves as a continuum where we need to actually complement whatever we're having. So these groups are looking at the following: adaptive and cognitive systems, AI and cybersecurity, AI for development, applications of machine learning, computational logic, ethics of AI, foundations of machine learning, knowledge representation and reasoning, and probabilistic modeling. And so the academics leading this will probably be in a whole range of institutions. But what is also crucial is the inclusion of social sciences research in everything we do. Because technology, no matter how you look at it, you're not doing it for technologists, you're doing it for human beings. And unless we really keep in mind that everything that we do has got to be human-centered, which is why issues around ethics, managing biases, making sure that we are inclusive will always be crucial. So we always make sure that we have built that aspect. We also have what we call the Saatchi Research Chairs, and this one on artificial intelligence, and also add other aspects, whether you talk about, as I indicated, ethics. So the partnership and the leadership that Google is showing is well appreciated, because the issue of us working with and collaborating with the private sector is really quite crucial, because it just manages the pace at which things can happen. So we will forever be thankful for this partnership. I also need to indicate that we have, over the period, also supported a whole range of students, whether you talk about those that are doing 3rd and 4th year, talking about in the region of 300 or so students, and also looking at PhDs and master students. And we continue to do this so that we do not wake up and say that we don't have young people who are replacing the older ones that are either growing and sometimes even departing. So we therefore need to continuously make a choice of replicating ourselves as we go. In the next couple of years, Dr. Mkwena, when we are busy preparing our own SASA cards, the young people needs to be coming on board to really begin to say, well, these old men have done enough, now they can move and we take over. And when we do so, we will hopefully hand over with joy. So I have mentioned the challenges. The one challenge, of course, is going to be the issue of the processing power that we require. The more complex the data, the more the processing power is required. We therefore need to build a lot of infrastructure to support the kind of work that we're looking at. And this will include supercomputing power. It will include things such as advanced chips. And here I'm not talking about the lunch that is likely going to include some deep-fried potatoes. And this is really where we begin to think about what is technology being used for today. Technology is a good thing, but it all depends on whose hands it is, because it can be a bad thing. We see today that there's a lot of use of geopolitics and technologies. It's a reality. Is that what we want technology to do? We see all sorts of what I term technology wars and jealousies and so on and so forth. Is that what technology is meant to do? When in the past, when we talk about what was happening during the Cold War, you always had space for science. And scientists always collaborated without fear or anything. Whether you were from the south or from the north or from the east or from the west, scientists always collaborate. And I think we need to preserve that particular space where scientists can be free to do science without fearing whether they are in South Africa, whether they are in Nigeria, whether they are in USA, whether they are in China, or whether they are in Japan. They need to be scientists. And they must do what scientists do, which is research. Lack of data, I've mentioned that. We need to make sure that we generate a lot of data, we create that. You know, we need to learn about, when people today talk about AI, you must thank us life scientists. This whole thing about data usage, we knew it long time ago, you know. Many years back when I was still doing postgraduate studies, we studied this whole thing around bioinformatics, you know. And now everybody is coming on and trying to push us aside. No, we're not going to go anywhere. So it is for that reason when South Africa was managing the impact of COVID, we relied so much on data and data usage, data mining, and actually it supporting our decision making. I can tell you now that much as you might have said and thought that when the president stood up to make an announcement that he was just waking up and say which announcement, we were providing heavy data-informed information, processing that on a daily basis. Whether it was bringing on board communication data, movement data, the epidemiological data, and then being able to say, if we're sitting at this trajectory, what is going to happen next is going to be this impact in these areas around COVID. So there is a lot that we can do with artificial intelligence. There is a lot that we can actually channel in development and not in creating distraction. So I therefore look forward to the deliberations as we have here. There's going to be hopefully a number of lessons that we're going to pick up, and from here, let us use AI to construct a better world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, DDG Moefe, for those important remarks. I like the point of technology in geopolitics. It's not just in geopolitics, but it's in wars as well. I mean, if you look at the current war in Ukraine and the role of big techs, but there's a debate for another day. Now, this brings us to the first presentation this morning, which will be done. The title of the presentation is on the insights from the Global Artificial Intelligence Readiness Index for Government. It will be done by Professor Randall Carlson. Now, if I can read his profile, it will take us the whole day. So I suggest what you do, just Google. Then you'll know. But amongst the roles that he has held, which is prominent for, include holding a string of senior executive positions in various organizations, such as South African Revenue Services, He was also the administrator for the NSFAS. His qualifications include a PhD in nanophysics. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Professor Randall Carlson.
Do I drive with the presentation with this? Yeah. Okay, there we go. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Monday morning is normally lots of coffee to wake you up, and I see everybody's bright and bushy-tailed. And thanks, Professor Carr, for doing the introductions. It saves me a lot of time, but welcome, in any case, to the Johannesburg Business School, and we are proud to host this on behalf of all the different centers that you've heard about here. And because this is what we want at the school, this vibrant debates, and look at world events and what's happening and how we can make a contribution. So Alistair, thanks for the invitation to present here today. My research interest is, of course, what's happening on the African continent, how can we do things better. And we look forward to a very exciting partnership. And in recognition of that invitation, I wore my Google shirt today. But I see. So let me get started straight away so that we can get, we don't waste any time. So we're living in a world which is becoming brittle. It's defined by the term Barney nowadays. Brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. And when I drove in this morning, 4 stories struck me on the talk show, the 702 talk show, that defines this world. The leader of the most powerful economy, Joe Biden, had to excuse himself because he wanted to go to bed in the middle of a press conference with the Chinese leader. And that to me is worrying. We have an acceleration of the Ukraine war, Ukraine-Russia war. They said they must finish it before winter, or they must intensify the engagement. I heard about South Africa is losing 61 billion rand in illicit flows of funds. Now that figure is stupendous because the last time I checked it was 81 billion for the entire Africa. So I have to go back and check whether that figure is correct. And this in the face of South Africa's fiscus being under severe strain. So this is the type of world we live in. It's no longer that predictable world where we can map for 5-year strategic plans. We have to become much more agile and much more responsive. And that also speaks to the type of leaders that we have to train for the future. And this is what this business school has adopted in its very short lifespan of only 5 years now, is to say that we have to train leaders that can cope with this new world. The world is no longer a predictable space. There's no longer separation of disciplines. There's no longer using your left brain or your right brain, because you'll be an invalid. You have to use both brains. And so we've built that into our curriculum, but this is not an advertising spot for JBS at the moment, so let me just get on. But leaders have to become much more au fait with the tech, with some of the mathematics and the statistics and the AI not hubris, but the AI narrative that's going around. And if you this particular article says that, there are tools existing in mathematics that can deal with uncertainty, and leaders should begin to understand how to embrace those tools because they are available and they've proved to be quite useful. And me being a physicist, I'm acutely aware of how important chaos theory is, how important decision-making under severe conditions of uncertainty are, and the tools are available in quantum physics and things like that. But we not all need to become that. We don't need to become au fait with the new world by becoming physicists or mathematicians. I think our leaders must just begin to understand the impact thereof in going forward. So we've moved away from the VUCA model, which defined the early 2000s, where we talked about uncertainty, volatility, and ambiguity. And the AI, as many speakers before me have pointed out, it actually threatens additional divides if you don't deal with it perfectly, or deal with it appropriately, rather. And initially you'll find my talk to be quite depressing if you look at the big divides that exist in Africa. But I hope to skip through all of that very fairly quickly so that we can look at some of the insights and some of the things that we can do in Africa to skip ahead and actually overcome those divides. And AI actually indeed do offer those opportunities for us, and it must just be harnessed properly. We sit on a lot of potential in countries, in developing countries in general, but South Africa in particular. Now, this slide actually spells out to me what type of divide we're talking about. GDP per capita in the US, in North America, is 67,000 US dollars. The world average is 12,000. Sub-Saharan Africa is 1.6 thousand. And that is quite a severe disparity, or rather range that we're talking about. Now, as I said earlier, we have to adhere to, or we need to exploit the AI, so we have to do development. We have to also listen to or respond to the global development goals. And how do you do that if you are poor as we are already? And I'll show further that post-pandemic, the African debt has actually doubled. So our debt repayments are even a further crippling force for us to move forward. If you look at what's happening in the rest of the world, you can see for yourself, the world is growing older, and I've chosen US and China, with falling fertility rates. In fact, I came across an article last night where it says Japan is emptying, is the word they used. So schools are closing. Japan's got a population of 123 million. By the end of the century, if things go according to the trends that we see now, Japan's population will be halved, more than halved, to 50 million. And so they're critically looking at the immigration laws, like the other, shall we call it, developed world countries, to bring in the youth from other parts of the world to sustain their social systems and also to sustain their economy. Now that's where the bottom graphic file slipped its way onto the slide last night, because I thought this is appropriate time to talk about the demographic dividend that we are talking about on the African continent. It is, people talk about a dividend, I say it's demographic potential. Because if we don't convert this properly, our best minds are going to be taken off the African continent, and we are going to become all the more poorer. So I thought let me early introduce the concept of the demographic dividend, if there's still more time. I'm going to skip through this fairly quickly because we all know about the societal impact of artificial intelligence, how it's going to change jobs, especially around generative AI and jobs, which I found quite interesting. This slide to me is very important because this modeling has been done and has been replicated by many people to show that if you were to ingest or adopt AI properly, you could stand to gain quite substantially from economic growth, first of all. And if you look at the US, it's estimated that the US can translate an additional 8.3 trillion US dollars in gross value added by 2035. And if you look at the slide, the graphic, you'll see that US, if they estimate that if they properly exploit the advantages of AI, they can accelerate the growth rate to 4.6%, as opposed to the 2.6 baseline that is currently being forecasted. And you can see that across many countries that they actually take this AI very, very seriously in economic forecasting. Let me get to the real pillar of, the real topic of my talk. There's a study being done by Oxford's Insights, which is called the Pillars of AI Government, AI Readiness, AI Government Readiness, or Government AI Readiness. And they have structured it around 4 or 3 pillars with subdivisions, which are many KPIs and many metrics that you can go into. But in essence, the first pillar is a government pillar which says, do your government have a strategic vision for how it intends to develop and manage AI? And what would be the appropriate regulations and attention to ethics that must be had? Then there's the technology sector pillar. That's in essence the access to tools for government or for the broader society. And then the data and infrastructure pillar. So these pillars were then broken up into sub-pillars and into different metrics, as I said earlier. And from that, a score is developed. Now, I haven't done it, but I thought of doing it, is to actually look at a correlation between the scores that we see here, that I'll show in a minute, and the actual, the amount of countries in particular regions that have adopted an AI strategy. Now, if you look at the top one, North America, and I'll show in a minute that USA was top across in this index. Basically, 100% of the North American countries, not basically, 100% of the North American countries have got a published and debated and well-considered AI strategy. If we skip to the bottom, sub-Saharan Africa, the only country on the African continent that's got an AI strategy is Mauritius. 4 other countries are busy, are quite far in advance with developing that strategy through the Smart Africa project. That is Rwanda, Benin, and Ghana. And for a moment, I forgot the 4th one. I think it's only 3 that can actually claim that they are close to getting to a published national AI strategy. And that speaks to our country as well. Because when we debate the funding of the AI Institute with government, it is as if it is an add-on. Now, when you have an AI strategy with a dedicated budget, then you can't say, no, we will think about this, and perhaps next year we'll allocate budget. Because this year we need money for housing. So that's the point I want to make. And so Mauritius, by virtue of it's having its own AI strategy, it's also reflected in their score, as I will point out in a minute. This was just a list of pull from the top countries, and I decided to add the BRICS countries in there so that you can, for reasons of comparison. So obviously, as I said earlier, the top country is the USA, followed by Singapore, and a little bit of daylight between the second and the third positions, which is the UK. And if you come down, then you look at the BRICS countries. South Africa is languishing at 47. Brazil is at 61. I don't see the full slide here, so I have to figure out which one. But in essence, the 2 countries that are dominating would be the USA and Singapore. And so I've taken those 2 countries and I analyzed their outcome from this index. And I went into a bit more detail and bring in the African context to that. I won't spend much time on this. Most of us know the technology state on the developing countries and how far behind we are, especially so far as technology and infrastructure is concerned, and access to technology. And perhaps this is a good point to just slip it in. I had been to India last year, and what struck me immediately was when I bought data. I bought a month voucher for 40 Rand equivalent, and it gave me access for an entire month to that data. Now, I was only there for a week, but when I did the calculation, it was still worth my while to buy a month voucher. And that was exactly 1/10 of the data cost, or the data cost in South Africa. So that already speaks to a country that is utterly committed to the digitization and employing AI to advance or enhance the economy. So let's look at some of the learnings from the US. So there's a strong appreciation of benefits of AI in both public and private sector. And this provides policy consistency during even political leadership changes. So things don't change when leaders change. And this, of course, as we all know, enhances investor and researchers' confidence, and also bring in R&D, strengthen geopolitical trade, and protection of IP. The EU and the US Trade Technology Council, established in 2021, provide further impetus, and that's why the US dominates the technology sector pillar index. Remember those 3 pillars that I spoke about? The government, technology, and data infrastructure? They dominate the technology pillar index. The US scores somewhat lower on data privacy, as there's a plethora of laws that governs it, but they have begun to do some work on that, and you'll see the detail on that. They've recognized that to be a problem. However, the dominant position, of course, I shouldn't have used the word may, actually do cultivate anti-competitive behavior by biggest tech companies, suppressing innovation. And what's a common trend that we see now in the US is that these big companies like Google buy up innovative small tech startups to bring in that innovativeness, to bring in that responsiveness, to bring in that agility. I will just use Google as an example because there was nobody else in the room, Alistair, so I don't feel so guilty. But that's a trend that's starting to develop. So whether that's good or bad, we will learn from that. But as long as big companies actually do realize that we need more and more innovative startups to give freedom of expression to innovation to young people, and even offer further opportunities. So that is some of the lessons that we can take away from the US. There's a lot more. Try to stick to the higher ones. Let's look at Singapore. Singapore is owed to its performance to the both the government and data infrastructure pillars, where they score very high, as you can see. Singapore also performs very well in digital capacity and adaptability dimensions due to its determination and effectiveness in implementing a dedicated and coordinated national AI strategy, emphasis, which was developed in 2019. Singapore's relatively lower scores on governance and ethics dimension indicate more statutory work is required to protect citizens against harmful public sector innovation and obtaining more buy-in from the general population. Singapore's strength is derived from its innovative and commitment to digital government, supplemented by a business-friendly legislative environment which leverages productive public-private sector partnerships, again underline public sector-private partnerships, to scaffold public sector innovation. Sub-Saharan Africa has, as a region, the lowest rank, 29.4 rank, if you compare that with the globe, with South Africa at 47.7 ranking, ranked 68 out of the 181 countries surveyed or studied. We are overrepresented at the bottom of the spectrum. There remain many barriers to progress on AI readiness in Sub-Saharan Africa. While broadband coverage has increased in recent years, the majority of the people in the region still lack access to mobile internet due in part to high device and data costs, as I've pointed out earlier. Thus, high inequality hinders development of AI-based technologies, even amongst those who would be able to access them, as the amount, quality, and representativeness of any data collected for use in AI is inherently poorer. It's a question of critical mass. As I said earlier, Mauritius leads in Sub-Saharan Africa, and by no small means because of its national AI strategy, and they score high in the governance pillar. I'm sorry if I rushed this. This is a lot of data I'm trying to get across in a very short space of time. South Africa follows with a global score of 47.7 with strength in data and infrastructure pillar. It is the only country in Sub-Saharan Africa with access to both a top 5 cloud provider and commercially available 5G infrastructure. South African telecommunication regulations have begun action on the high mobile costs with massive potential if that should be realized. By the way, for those that don't know, the CSR has mapped the entire internet, shall we call it, footprint of South Africa. And there are pockets, and the divides that we know about are also evident in that footprint. Rural divides and things like that. But there are some green shoots in adopting AI. So the African Commission on Human Rights and People's Rights have followed the UN to say that access to AI is a basic human right, and they've called on the African governments to follow suit. Progress on data protection, with majority of Sub-Saharan African having passed data protection laws. Professor Abajiri was Nigeria. How could I? In my 4 countries that I tried to list. It just shows that I can also get nervous. Kenya and Nigeria are showing dynamic startup ecosystems, with Kenya ranking very high on venture capital availability, while Nigeria produced the second highest number of AI research papers in the Sub-Saharan region in 2021. Fintech is the fastest growing startup sector in the region due to a large unbanked population, and AI is certainly being applied in that space, as we'll see in a minute. So again, skipping forward, the IMF has determined that the main obstacle in implementing SDGs in developing countries is money. So we did 2.6 trillion rand in investment in education, health, roads, and all of those things, and yet we are faced with this debt crippling cost. I said this at a conference in Switzerland, and people didn't like it very much, and I say, until the developed world understands that by holding the developing nations hostage by high debt, and debt ratings that make it almost impossible to pay back this debt, you are not going to make progress in SDG implementation. This just shows that the debt profile of Africa, it's horrendous. Zambia is probably going to default soon. And in this environment, we have to create the capital and develop our youth dividend to be able to participate in AI-led economic growth and service delivery. South African society remain largely unconnected. DG, we must talk to the minister. We must get AI into every single school, because that's where it starts. The specs you can see for yourself there, we have more than 100% penetration of cell phones, but only 10% actually use it to get onto a website. They use it for Facebook and what's the other things they use it for? Instagram. And the laptop figures are there for all of you to see. So we have to get people onto the net and with accessible and cheap enough data so that they can begin to apply the innovation. The most clever hackers that we have in the world is in Brazil because they're educated and have access to data. And they are now being employed by big tech companies because they're such efficient hackers, which is a good way to get into the market. If they don't want to employ you, you hack into your way into the economy. So as a region, if you take any other regions, if you look at the top curve, you will see that South, look at other social factors. We have to have smaller families. We have to allow women to get into the AI space. And a whole host of socioeconomic and gender-based issues need to be addressed to be able to address that or to realize that youth dividend. Now, if we don't do it, other people are going to do it for the selected top slice of our youth and then harvest them into their countries. And that's already happening. My son is teaching in Vietnam. He's earning 3 times the amount that he can earn in South Africa. In fact, they tried to entice him to the UK with a £20,000, shall we call it, a traction fee. So we are already seeing a lot of the African youth being attracted into countries to support their falling demographics or their unsustainable demographics as they has become. So there are some strategies which I've gathered from a lot of literature. It's not mind-boggling, it's probably more common sense than anything else. So countries that are able to harvest the demographic opportunities have a working age population with good health, quality education, decent employment, and a lower proportion of young dependents. The national AI ecosystem must support the growing and innovative youth entrepreneurs with leadership development opportunities, accessible and affordable finance. If you look at what China has done for its technopreneurs, it's just unbelievable. The concessions they provide to young people to get into the market. In fact, the US bankruptcy laws are designed for you to become bankrupt as an entrepreneur first, because they believe that after you've become bankrupt first, then only can you begin to exercise proper entrepreneurship. That's why people say, I just go declare myself bankrupt. But the idea being is that failure must not be seen as a termination of entrepreneurship, but rather the beginning thereof. I don't know whether we can afford a lot of bankruptcies. We already have enough, I think. Leverage technology to drive impact and scale. As I said, education, employment in the health industry, Professor Khan. The types of things that we can do in our own hospitals to make sure that our people are healthy and have access to decent health care was done before, by the way, in South Africa. Okay, I remember just an anecdote when I was in the US. My family, young family, went with me, and when I took my boy for I paid $100 and I said, but in our country it's free, and they couldn't believe it. And I said, yes, it is free. And I said, and if you don't have the $100, they say, then you just don't get the shot. And so people were dying at that time in the US because of preventable diseases. I hope they fixed it by now, because it was really a tragedy to be in such a leading nation and see this denial of access to healthcare. Perhaps they've done it now, but Obamacare didn't work so well for them also. So if we look at all the doom and gloom that I've spelled out here, go and look at what some other countries are doing and developing countries are doing. M-Pesa is a major success on the African continent, and it has been mimicked by many other finance providers throughout the world. Okay? It has grown to become a full financial service provider. Super apps, it's been used by 9 million customers to access a broad range of services, including savings, insurance, and credit. So M-Pesa is now working with software developers to create mini apps. I can skip on to India, and the Indian story is just and it just wipes your mind. I mean, we're talking about volumes that runs into billions, and I'll spend a bit more time on that on my next slide. The Bangladesh case study for me was quite interesting. Bangladesh was complaining about youth unemployment not so long ago of 10%. For them, it was unacceptably high. Now, you know where our youth unemployment stands. And so they started a program which they called freelancing, AI freelancing. And they trained up young people that could work at their own time anywhere in the world, and by that they reduced it from 10% to 5% unemployment rate. So look at the advantages. These young people bring in foreign currency, they don't use the roads, so they don't have to sit in traffic jams like I did this morning, having to drive from Pretoria to Johannesburg. And it opened up opportunities for women, because highly educated women were sitting at home looking after babies and not being able to participate in the economy. And through this freelancing system, they were able to get and generate additional income. So that to me is quite an interesting case study. And I would, if you have time, I would urge you a way that we can get and harvest and harness our youth dividend going forward. So this I stole from Alistair's slide when he gave a presentation here the last time. So thanks, Alistair. So Alistair says, and he's right, because I couldn't find better information than this. The private sector must address 4 key areas: physical capital, affordable internet access to all, human capital, which I've spoken to quite a bit and I won't repeat that, technology, and competitiveness. And this should form almost for me the progress or the foundation for the South African National AI Strategy when we develop it, and hopefully soon when we develop it. Just come back to India. In India, they have mapped 1.3 billion people on the Aadhaar system, which is a 17-point biometrical mapped system. So in other words, your face and your iris, everything is your identity, your single digital identity, which is one of the projects that we have in the AI Institute. And they told me when I come back to India, I won't need a visa, physical visa, because my face will be my visa. What that allows them to do is to open for each one of those people a bank account. And therefore, all those 1.3 billion people can transact with each other seamlessly, without, and instantaneously almost, not almost, instantaneously, and therefore cut out all of these middlemen. Now, you could think for yourself, if you have a system like this, then you won't have a NSFAS problem anymore. You won't have a SASSA problem anymore. And nobody can claim on your behalf because it's a biometrically mapped and underpinned banking system. It is just unbelievable what they've done. And the amount of volumes that they've gone through, you can see for yourself there. And so we spoke to these guys when we launched our single digital ID project in the AI Institute, and they're quite willing to share this information with us. The investment against the returns is not even comparable. The returns are just stupendous. In fact, they told me that mostly foreigners carry cash because they're not in the system, because the locals can buy bananas on the street, pay for it directly, with the money directly deposited into the vendor's account through the system of UPS. You can see that 4 billion transactions were done on the UPI in 2022 alone. So this is India's basis on which they are building their quest to become the leading economy in the world. And they are getting there. People, if you go to India, they are building fast trains, tracks for fast trains between all the major cities. They're planning a number of airports. Somebody said 240. It sounded too much to me, so I didn't want to say it repeated here because I don't want to be accused of being hyperbolic in my assertions. But generally, you could see the progress that is being made just on the investment of AI. Timing is perfect.
Okay. Which then leads us perfectly to the next session. And I think it deserves another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. We are now moving to the last leg of the morning session. I know it's a lot of information to absorb, but this is going to be a very interesting session. It is the public lecture titled AI for Good. I am going to first and foremost request Dr. Jason Hickey, who heads Google Research in Ghana, to come to the podium. And I think you will, what's the sitting arrangement? Is sitting this side? I think Jason must sit this side. Please do take a seat. Jason work focuses on identifying and implementing ways Google can use to advance machine learning methods to improve welfare in Africa, particularly around the areas of food security. I think Randall has touched on those issues, weather, climate forecasting, pest and crop disease prevention, crisis responses. The most interesting part that was very interesting for me is languages and many more. Amongst his qualifications, Jason holds a Master's of Engineering in Electrical Engineering, as well as a PhD in a Master's and a PhD degrees in Computer Science. The respondent, Professor Abejide Ade Ibijola. Distinction, please give him a round of applause as he comes to the. Abejide is a professor is a full professor of artificial intelligence and applications here at JBS. Please, have a seat to that side. He is an NRF-rated scientist whose main interest includes algorithms, AI innovations for the thriving fourth industrial revolution, applications of formal grammar, strings, pictures, and many more things that are related to AI-driven digital transformation and theoretical computing. The next speaker, Professor
Kenya, South Africa, many countries here in Africa, and our purpose is to train our software engineers in how to apply methods in realistic ways to real-world problems. Okay, good. So I think we have our first slide. And to begin, I'd like to start with a short clip from Yossi Matthias, who is Vice President of Research in Google. So nope, we're not there. Oh, here we go. Perfect.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me. I wish I could be with you all physically today, but I had to head back to Israel after a full week in Kenya and Ghana, focused on climate AI and the ways all of us can come together to leverage AI to secure Africa's climate future. So although I cannot be physically today, it was really important for me to send you a short message. Maybe I'll start by introducing myself for a minute. I'm Yossi Matthias. I'm Vice President of Engineering and Research at Google. I lead a research organization focusing on impact-driven research, innovation, and moonshots. We're working together across US, Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, where we are proud to have Google research teams in both Accra and Nairobi. This allows us to build for Africa in Africa and to have teams here building for Africa and the world. My team is working on a mission to advance AI and use it to solve some of the world's greatest societal challenges and impact the lives of billions. We're leading global projects across our core focus areas, including generative AI, AI for climate and sustainability, and AI for health. Before diving into our work in each of these domains, I wish to talk a little bit about our approach to developing AI. There's no doubt AI is transformative today. We are really at the heart of the AI revolution that is transforming potentially every aspect of our lives and businesses. And we at Google believe that we must approach this development, this revolution, by being bold and responsible. Meaning developing AI in a way that maximizes the positive impact to society while addressing the challenges. This means we have to be responsible from day one and make sure we're working with all the relevant stakeholders that can help us build technologies, tools, and products that are truly beneficial to people around the world. And to do so, with safety and privacy in mind.
Perfect. Thank you, Yossi. And for the next part, I'd like to just walk us through a few of the examples of research that we're carrying out here on the continent to focus on problems for Africa. The first topic, these will be very short, but In Africa, we're missing make good weather forecasts. That includes weather stations and weather radar. So what we're doing is applying AI to use satellite imagery, which is available in Africa, and inferring, predicting the weather from that. This is an example of a satellite image from Meteosat, and the blue areas are where we predict precipitation using AI technology. So one other thing to mention there is that weather forecasting is really expensive, and so the top weather forecasts are driven by the United States and the Europeans who have the money to fund the supercomputers, run the supercomputers that do these weather forecasts. AI technology, in contrast, is cheap. This is something that an organization can easily run, and this can be available to any such organization. Are we cutting out here? No, it's okay. All right, thank you. Another project that we've been working on is open buildings. What we would like to do is we'd like to map the buildings across Africa, just determine where all the buildings are for many reasons. Lots of variety. And what we do is we apply satellite images and then we train AI models to detect where the buildings are. This is an example, I think this is here in South Africa, where before AI, many of the buildings were left undetected, and we've been able to use AI technology to draw maps of where those buildings are in very high detail. Our efforts at the bottom there, you see the technology in action where we're outlining all the buildings in the area, and we've applied this technology across the Global South to all of Africa, covering about 64% of the Global South and 1.8 billion buildings. This is just training AI models against satellite imagery. These data sets are open. You can access them. You can just search for Google Open Buildings Dataset. They're available and widely used by many governmental and non-governmental and commercial organizations. Another area that's of critical importance is food security. Hundreds of millions of people go to bed with either moderate or severe hunger, and we would like to understand this better. As we know, the vast majority of food insecurity occurs in Africa for many, many different reasons, but among others is that the climate impacts are highest in Africa. Farms are rain-fed, so that means that weather and climate have a severe impact, and many of our, 70% of Africans rely on farming in some part for their income. So we want to focus on this, and we're doing that in several ways. Another issue that, of course, we understand is over the next 30 years, the population is expected to double in Africa. So we need to accompany that with an increase in productivity. And productivity, agricultural productivity in Africa is increasing, but not nearly at the rate that we need to sustain this kind of population growth. And so we want to develop methods to improve that food security. One method that we've used in our Accra lab is in cooperation with the UN Food and Agriculture Organization company InstaDeep, the focus from hatching. And we've been developing AI models that predict these hatching is environmentally driven for the most part. It is caused by proper temperature and humidity, soil moisture, and we can use AI models to infer when the locusts are going to hatch. Another area that we think is really important is in the prediction of food insecurity. If we can predict when insecurity is going to occur, we can understand better the root causes of that and take intervention. The forecasts that are out there right now performed by USAID and other organizations called FuseNet. This is a forecast that's developed by a panel of experts. So experts meet every 6 months, get together and discuss the food security scenarios, make forecasts together, and issue forecasts. What you see in the map there, the red areas are famine, and the brown and yellow areas are moderate food insecurity. But this is a panel of experts. It's difficult to convene. They meet every 6 months, And so many events are not caught by by this panel, by these forecasts. And so what we are doing is using AI to augment this. We don't want to replace the panel of experts, but we want to supply additional information that we can use for forecasting. So we can take weather information, economic factors, geographic factors, conflict information, and use those to help supplement and augment the food security forecast. And we're training AI models to do this food security forecasting now. Now, one thing that I spoke of in the previous example is that our population in Africa is going to double over the next 30 years. Think about that. That's an enormous number of babies who are going to be born over the next 30 years. And it's extremely important that we support maternal health and baby health. And that one of the most important ways to do this is through monitoring, through ultrasound. The problem is pretty extreme. 830 women die each day due to preventable causes related to pregnancy and childbirth. 830 women per day and 6,500 babies each day. Most of these, 70%, are in sub-Saharan Africa. And in most cases, these women are not able to access ultrasound, and these deaths are preventable if we had the information. The issue is that ultrasound, for one, is extremely expensive. That machine that you see on the right is an ultrasound machine. It costs between $100,000 and $300,000. This is an extremely expensive equipment. And furthermore, the results are difficult to interpret. So typically it takes about 2 years to train an operator to understand that ultrasound image that you get from the machine and interpret it in a way that can be useful and actionable. So we have two major problems here. Fortunately, on the device side, during the last few years, very cheap ultrasound devices have been developed that you can use with a smartphone. These, are still cost between $2,000 and $6,000, but that's far cheaper than $100,000 to $300,000. And so that means we can deploy this in many, many more different areas. But the operator gap still remains. And so here's where we see an opportunity for AI. So using AI, we're developing a program called Blind Sweep, where the operator follows a very specified course of sweeping the device over the patient's abdomen in a predefined pattern. And we use AI then to interpret the results and provide an ultrasound observation and diagnosis. So the AI is assisting the operator in producing this diagnosis. Oops, back. And we're partnering with an organization in Kenya, Jacaranda Health, to pilot this program. So in this case, we've developed an application that runs on a smartphone. We're training operators to do the blind sweep process of moving the instrument over the patient's abdomen. This is something that can be used, that midwives and nurses can use with relatively little experience. And we also have trained doctors and midwives and nurses present who can interpret the results. And this can be transformative for maternal health. Another area that is, of course, extremely important is African languages. Okay, there we go. So Africa is extremely linguistically diverse, with over 1,000 different languages. I believe there's some 12 languages in South Africa alone, 12 languages. Across the continent, 30 languages with up to 100 million speakers, 130 with up to 10 million, maybe around 500 with up to 1 million speakers. And if we want to be inclusive, and this is an enormous challenge because not only in terms of training models for these different languages, but also in terms of data collection. So we need speakers to interact, to provide training sets so that we can train our AI models for these languages. at Google, we've already had an effort to train models for 15 different languages spoken in West and East and Southern Africa, here in South Africa, also in Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda. So these languages cover about 242 million people. Of course, we have a long way to go. This is 15 languages. We have a lot more work to do. But this is a step in the right direction. This product has been launched. Gboard is a feature that allows you to speak vocally to your smartphone instead of typing it in, and that allows people to speak, in this case, speak their native African language to their phone and interact with their phone using their language. And if we're to cover the remaining some 800 languages, the additional languages in Africa, it's really necessary that we partner with local organizations on the ground. We've developed many collaborations with universities and private partners. It's also important that we believe that it's also important that this data be open. This is not something that should be exclusively belong to any one organization. So these partnerships are organized around an open source movement. And if you want to look at some of those examples, there's an example on GitHub for the Wolof language. This is a language in Senegal, for Akan and Ui, which are Ghanaian languages. You can scan the QR code there at the bottom. So we're making progress. We're continuing to work in this direction. For languages in particular, it's really important that we develop this technology here on the continent in the context where the languages are spoken. So I believe this is very important for us, a very important area for us to focus on here in Africa in our Google Research Labs. Okay, so that was 5 different projects that we're working on in our offices here. That's just a really quick snippet. There's additional work that we're doing, including large language models and so forth. One thing I want to say is that my career in artificial intelligence has been long. Started, I don't know, even remember how long ago, but in the early 90s, I started my doctorate in artificial intelligence, and it's been a long path. And I know that there are some students in the audience here and who might want to pursue a similar path, and we want your skill and your talent to work on these very important problems. And I would just encourage you to take advantage of the curriculums that's out there and also study your core computer science classes and study project work as well. I would say my journey has been wonderful, and I think at this moment, one of the most meaningful times of my career is right now because I can use this technology to address real-world problems. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason, for that wonderful presentation. Abejide, I don't know, you can respond while sitting there. If you want to stand, you can stand, but I think it is there's quite a number of takeaways on the good aspects that could be used for AI.
Yes, I think interesting projects you have going on there, by the way, especially the census one. I've always thought about how to use algorithms to count people, because what you really need is an estimation.
Exactly.
Nothing much. So using satellite images, I think that was an interesting one. There was a time I thought one could do that with social media as well. Because on Facebook, everybody tags. The problem with that algorithm is that not everyone is on social media. But if you could look at kind of like an intersection of all the platforms, and you can extrapolate the data, it's possible to know how many people, or an estimated number of people, because most people are getting on social media now and all of that. I think you have interesting projects. The food one as well, that's a good one. But one thing, my comment would be that we need students to get involved. But there's a long journey for our students. So the first thing is literacy, for example, computer literacy. You'd be surprised. how low those numbers look. Then after that, you now need to teach them how to use off-the-shelf tools.
Right.
That's like using computer on steroids, being able to be better at operating computers. Then introductory programming, because as nice as this sounds, AI, you don't just wake up and start creating AI algorithms. So I think we need to get our students involved, but a lot of ideas are popping through my mind. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. I think you're raising a very important point, but talk to us about.
Especially when it applies to hate speech. So I think when the microphone gets to you, you might have to say a lot of things about that. But you'll be surprised the investment of platforms like Facebook in checking content, and there are many algorithms out there. But in terms of the projects I see here, there are no ethical issues that I can see. The governments just have to be on board. We need to get you those language speakers so that they can contribute to your corpus. And then we can train more models for different African languages and can scale things up.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nicole, you do a lot of work and research work, especially in the Horn of Africa, and the possibilities that AI could help us resolve real life problems. What's your take on some of these projects?
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Mandla. And I think also when we spoke earlier, you said I should try and be a little bit critical. So
Yeah.
I apologize in advance for this. But also
That's
coming
great.
from a humanities perspective, I think we're not always part of these debates, and it's great that we are part of them here. So I think my first, thanks. I guess so for my first sort of question, when I see these AI for good projects, I want to know what is really new about them. I mean, a number of us watched, the whole ICT for development phenomenon that went on for decades, and now it's AI for good. And so how do we situate these within this sort of broader context? And I think we also heard a lot about how social media was going to liberate people, connect the unconnected. And now we hear much more, and I think also as Professor Khan was speaking about the entrenchments of inequalities. And I think also the responsibility of corporations in this space, where they've not always handled these inequalities very well. So it's great that Google has an office in Johannesburg and in Ghana. I don't know if they have an office in the Central African Republic, for example. Do they have an office in Somalia? How are you engaging with other areas of the continent that might not be as central to your business interests? And I guess my second comment related to that is also the projects that you presented here were quite apolitical. So where's the politics in this? And how do we bring the politics back? And should we care about the politics in it? And I think for these next 2 days, we're going to be speaking about AI policies, but these are inherently political projects. And so, as corporations increasingly become involved in this development projects, you sort of see this techno-solutionism. And these aren't techno-solutions, these are political challenges that need very, very complicated answers. And so how can we move to a sort of more diverse debate in this space? And, and I think, again, we've seen this with the behavior of corporations over the last 10 years, here largely speaking about social media platforms. They handle elections very differently in the US than they do in Uganda. I mean, the moderation of online hate speech, of mis and disinformation, we've seen a lot of failures. And here I think also, as the Dean was speaking about this morning, the focus on failures is really interesting. And maybe, it's great to talk about the good projects here, but maybe we need to do a project around AI for good failures, thinking of a database of these, looking at them, what went wrong, what can we learn from them? Because we can learn as much from the bad things as we can from the good things. And I think my sort of final point here would be, and I think it's absolutely wonderful that Google, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was great that Google was partnering with UJ on this. But how can we think about the corporatization of the development space? So I think this is something that's new. We're all in uncharted territory. These AI for good projects are really important. But what does it mean for a big, powerful US corporation to be so intimately involved with governments, partnering with governments, having access to this data, designing responses? And how can we, think of leveraging this, but also think critically about it, and what does it mean?
No, you can hold on to the mic, because it's yours that is not working.
Okay.
And before we come back to you, Jason, I would like to just, Randall, if you could just juxtapose for us your deep insights into the work that you did with what Jason is sharing with us about how AI could be used for the benefit of humanity.
Yes, thank you, and I'm glad I'm having a second bite at the cherry because I perhaps glossed over one very important aspect in my presentation, and what makes this conference even more relevant and more appropriate is the fact that the biggest gain can be had, the biggest advances can be had in overcoming regulatory constraints and ethical constraints that can move us forward much earlier or much quicker. So if we can move from this foundation and build on it, then we can actually get into the AI space and the AI, shall we call it, frontiers much quicker. I think what struck me from the presentation that Jason did now, it emphasizes the importance of maternal health care, because we are going to have the youngest population by, if we don't have it already, by 2035. And so a prerequisite of the youth dividend is a healthy child. You cannot be effective in your education system if children are constantly sick or are poorly, poor nutrition, suffer poor nutrition, all of that. So that is absolutely a very wonderful project in bringing those things home. And I quite particularly like the democratization, as you put it, of the scanning systems and make it easily available. And I think we need to find a way to shorten the uptake thereof. So that's absolutely wonderful. It's perfectly in line with what I think the continent needs. The weather forecasting and climate modeling is very important because Africa is the most vulnerable to climate change. It is, in fact, extremely vulnerable to climate change. And so we don't want Africa, whilst we do all of these other good things, being railroaded or what's the word I'm looking for? Off-roaded. Derailed, sorry, is the word I'm looking for. Derailed by those types of challenges. But as I was listening, I was also trying to think, and I'm glad you brought up the issue about the political, shall we call it, milieu. Because one of the projects that we have in our institute, which we are in discussion with the National School of Government with, and which we both have identified to be extremely important and needs to be accelerated, is the professionalization of the civil service. And we both agreed, because our literature points in the same direction, is that digital literacy is actually the foundation on which we need to build the professionalization of the civil service. So he's talking about blockchain and talking about AI and talking about all sorts of things. And the person that you're talking to that must make the ultimate policy decision don't have a clue what you're talking about. So that is going to be our departure point in that particular space. So yes, I mean, Google should be everywhere on the African continent, but yeah, our governments and our civil society and our universities should come to the party. We can't expect corporates to carry the load alone. But I think where it's very important in the AI Institute, and if there's space of time, I can talk more about that, is that we should not be pulling in opposite direction, that we need to find points of convergence and points of maximum impact jointly between academia, private sector, and public sector.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, Jason, let's come back to you. I mean, I think Nicole is raising a very important point that technologies, and AI in particular, are not class neutral. And even development is not a political process. What's your views on that? I mean, as we try to advocate for the use of AI for good.
So one of the points that you touched on is education for the workforce for AI. For that, we want this to be as inclusive as possible. Africa is a tremendous resource. Just on the education side, in general, like Africa to Silicon Valley, that are providing additional training around projects and AI technology. So that's one other path. Now, the class, so your question is about
just the politics, broad politics.
The broad politics. I'm not sure whether I am equipped to answer that question.
maybe we should open this question for the audience, for the floor.
If I can, I come in and
yeah,
just okay.
You'll come in, but I think those who have inputs, questions, or even answers for us, please feel free to raise your hand. There are roving mics for you to make inputs. But Nicole, and then we'll come to you, Charles.
No, I was just going to try and help to provide a little bit more context for that question, because I think as we look at like anticipatory action, and the UN has said increasingly a larger percent of their budget is going to go to predicting and identifying catastrophes and crises before they happen. I think it started with the environment, it started with climate change, it's moved on to epidemics, for example, health. But the sort of frontier of this, the next phase, is violent conflict. And this is something that my team, we've been looking at a lot. You know, and it's a very, very difficult, messy thing to look at. But the UN is interested in it. I presume Google's interested in it. I sort of get it from your ground up mapping of urban spaces. And this is becoming increasingly political. So not to say that the environment isn't political, it is 100%, but I think we're going to be seeing this much more in our faces as we look at anticipatory action and how we respond. And it's going to take more collaboration from, and I think this is one wonderful thing at UJ, is that we have people from the humanities working with people in computer science, working with the business school to try and look at these questions, but it is the human element within all of this that we're going to start to have to address more when it comes to AI than I think we have been.
Absolutely, Nicole. I think strategies for collaborations are going to be important. I mean, if there's one thing that we should try and come up with here, are those if we're going to conceptualize this concept of AI for good. Charles, I'll come to you, and then I see there are two hands. There are three hands this side, and then you'll be the fourth one. So we'll start with Charles.
Nicole, thank you so much. I think you've actually answered what I was going to say, pose the question. So I like that you asked the question and answered it yourself. However, just to build on it, as Google, one of the critical things that we understand and fundamentally why we're actually here and why we started the Africa Internet Academy is that we cannot exist outside government work, right? And I think that anyone who thinks that as a private institution you can be able to succeed or operate outside government and government regulations, I think you're misinformed. So we understand that we must work lock and step with government, with policymakers, but it's critical for us to do that, both from inception of technology and ideas and all through the process. Professor, you mentioned the really, I like to say it's overused example of M-Pesa. And one of the key things that led to the great success of M-Pesa is that partnership between Safaricom and the Central Bank to make sure that a lot of people actually think that it wasn't regulated. Yet, what happened was they were delivering information on a daily basis and metrics to really make sure that it was working for good, right? And that if they needed to mitigate any challenges, they could do that almost on a real-time basis. But that's the importance of really great collaboration between government, policymakers, and private sector. And for me, I add academia into that. Because one of the critical things that you do is the research that is actually seeing what's happening in society on a real-time basis. And that's really critical for us to ensure that we infuse the three elements in terms of private sector, in terms of government, as well as academia, to come up with solutions that are going to drive the world forward. But thank you.
Absolutely. Nicole, we'll come to you. There were three hands at that side. Sorry, I can't see your name, so if you could just introduce yourselves. And then, go for it, and then we'll go to you after.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Mamkosi, and I'm the chairperson of the Film and Publications Board. I think my question or comment is, I think also around the brittle nature of exactly that partnership, as you have outlined. As much as it is very much necessary, obviously it remains embedded with the very challenges, because each of the parties have different responsibilities, be it policy making, regulatory, profit making, making a difference, and we'll all make a difference because we want it to work for good, and we're going to try and find common grounds, but whilst maintaining our our ultimate mandates as the different pillars. But I think linked to that, I noticed in the presentation made by Dr. Randall about the ranking of the different countries, one thing that stood out for me was how those countries that are leading, be it US and Singapore, they are ranking high, obviously, on their governance AI readiness, but admittedly very low when it comes to the governance and the ethics and all the privacy policies in relating to that. And hopefully in the next 2 days, and I'm not sure if you can comment on this, but the correlation of how maybe, a country is supposed to move further ahead and then come back and deal with the issues of privacy and governance and ethics. That's why those countries ended up being ahead as they are. And in some of the countries, in some of the, maybe speaking for South Africa, I would say maybe we do prioritize a lot the issues of governance and regulating and make sure that there is that a structure in place. And is that maybe contributing to the hindrance of us, then be considered to be, ahead in our ranking? What is the correlation between that focus of governance and ethics, in the rankings of the readiness? It's not in any way excusing all the other things that obviously could be done better. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Zama. The gentleman over there on your right.
Thank you very much. I'm Anthony Julies. I've spent many years at the National Treasury. And the question, and thank you very much for the presentations. The challenge and the role of government is very important, I would imagine, given the amount of data that exists within the government sector. The problem, or probably the challenge, is as head of assets and liability management at the Treasury, we have identified all our assets, financial assets, we've identified all our financial liabilities, but there is no connection between the asset and the liability sides of the balance sheet. And so when you ask the question about impact of government's data and the work that it does, you are really not able to give a good argument about the net wealth effect, right? The net wealth, which is the net of your asset and liability management. And that's all about data, and then it really comes down to the micro level. So we have a macro picture, but we don't have the interpretation of this macro picture for ordinary citizens. And so the key challenge, and this is where I would imagine the role of artificial intelligence would be, is how do you then, as a public administrator, reconcile, that is where government needs to play its role, reconcile the expectations of the state with the expectations of citizens. There is no discussion. This is really about the accountability, the data is there, and then the Constitution is central to this, because earlier in the presentation, there was mention to social and economic, would be in asking government whether it is effectively delivering on its mandate in respect to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, which says it is in the context of socioeconomic rights, whether, and this is where data plays a role, artificial intelligence plays a role, whether the state is in fact delivering on its duty, which is for citizens to have access to the socioeconomic rights, and in that regard, the state must promote, the state must fulfill it, the state must protect it, and the state must respect. Those four words are in the Constitution.
Okay, now we got a question. So there's a second last question there, and then you'll be the last one. Then we'll come back to close. Yes, please go for it briefly.
Thanks a lot, Prof, and good morning to all. This is Zolani Zonyane. I'm from the Municipal Edge as the head of editorial. I've spent almost 2 years working on the budget reforms throughout the continent, and digital divide, or I would say technology divide, is rife. As Prof. Randall has also painted a picture about South Africa. What I'm interested in, specifically on collaborations, a term that is coming through quite often this morning. What are the current conversations, specifically in engaging, be it government, private sector, towards investing in technology infrastructure? Because that's one of the critical elements. But beyond that, raising awareness of the digital transformation, use of AI technology, more on, I'll say, government and also the public, because for an example, if you look at South Africa on public participation, on budgeting, both provincial and national governments, the score that has been issued by International Budget Partnership in 2021 was 19 out of 100, which is very low. So if maybe you can reflect on that, it can be one of the panelists, but I think that will also go a long way. Thanks a lot, Prof.
Thank you very much, Zolani. The last question here, please go for it briefly.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Irongo Houghton. It's a pleasure to be back in South Africa. It's the only country that actually can pronounce my surname properly. And that's because there's some significant real estate here that I've yet to claim, called Houghton. But I had a couple of comments. I mean, first of all, just to thank everybody who has spoken this morning. My mind is exploding in terms of the potential for human rights-based artificial intelligence work that we can do. I work for Amnesty International, and I had a couple of observations. One was, first of all, just how much we must give each other grace and space, psychological space and safety to have these conversations, because I think we tend to think that these are all fairly technical conversations, but they're actually, conversations of power, privilege, and exclusion as well. We're very thankful to Google for the little demonstration we had as we were driving here. Instead of using GPS, we went for the human approach, which is a long, detailed explanation of how to get here, which invariably took us to two other locations before we got here. But I was really present, and I say this with no wish to get anybody in trouble, particularly my tate who was driving. But I just wanted to say that human behavior is just so critical in this conversation, right? One of the things that struck me with the AI Readiness Index, and I'm coming to this, if I can use the phrase, I'm kind of human learning, so I'm a bit like ChatGPT. Which in very early stages. But the thing that struck me with the Readiness Index is it has three pools, right? Which is governance, technology, and data, infrastructure. But there is no society pool, right? So if you think about it, it is, trust and the levels of credibility of information is probably the most important thing within how AI will roll out and how it will become either a force for good or for polarization. But we don't have that framework in the index. Right? So that's the first thing.
In conclusion.
In conclusion. The second thing I've picked up is that although Africa is really behind in terms of policy, we're actually in a very good space because we have the opportunity to build from the ground up using this fourth pillar, which is really the pillar around human understanding and also trust, particularly between government and civil society and others. There's more, but let me stop there.
I think you are raising very pertinent points of which we definitely should pick up as we go on. But we are hopelessly out of time. So I'm going to start with you, Nicole, just to reflect on some of the points, but also give us your closing remarks in 2 minutes.
1 minute.
One
Sure.
minute.
No, I'll just respond to actually Charles and to our colleague from Amnesty International, because I very much agree with you on that. I would just say also with this AI Readiness Index, there's a lot of discussion of the state. And I think, again, if we can have AI for social good in broader conversation with the development sector, I think there's been a lot of move away from the state in international development towards discussion of public authorities, towards discussion of what is working, towards going with the grain. I think this conversation is slightly less relevant in South Africa, again, appreciating the diversity of the continent, but it's much more relevant, as Menda said, in the region where a lot of my research is, in the Horn of Africa. So for example, I've done work on the Somali territories, looking at innovation, and I would say Somalia actually has the most ambitious mobile money system in the world. Why? What makes it work in the absence of government? What is the role of different authorities? What is the role of customary law, Sharia law, other actors regulating this? So I think as we think of AI for social good, we also have to very much look beyond the state and look at the politics of other public authorities.
Thank you, Nicole. Abejide?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think this conversation sometimes also, because I had somebody mention access, this conversation is, we're having it at a very superficial level, because if you consider the population of Africa, to the guys that you are working with in Ghana, and that's a very small population. I think the infrastructure we have to look at first is actually the actual humans on the ground. They don't have access most times. So the educational system as well, I'm not sure every institution you've worked with is of the standard of UJ, for example. Data collection, what's the quality of the data you're collecting to train these models? And if you philosophically, if I pose the question to you and say, if machine is supposed to consume data and be like us, then how come we are now at a place where we want to doctor the machine again? Because that's another deep rabbit hole there. Machine learning means that the machine copies you, what you've been posting on the internet, and tries to predict something or do it like you. So when we start having that framework, society, for example, that's a good framework to have. How do you then put that in a box? Because your society and mine are not the same. So then that opens another rabbit hole there. But interesting conversation.
Interesting, interesting. Thank you very much. You deserve a round of applause. Jason?
Yes, no, I love it. So conversations like this are exactly what we need. On the technology side, we're, as you saw from what I presented, we're pursuing technologies that are fair and unbiased and safe and for the public good. But as a research institution, we're focused on the technology. What's really important is that we have conversations like this and collaborations around the impact that all of these tools, all of this technology has on society and how it's going to shape society. Even with the languages, it seems obvious that we want to train our models to understand African languages. But as we do that, there's going to be an effect on a human effect from that technology. And to deeply understand that, we need to partner with organizations that are on the ground and academia and sociologists who understand the impact of what we're doing. So,
thank you very much, Jason. A round of applause for Jason. Randad in 30 seconds.
That's impossible. But one thing that I should caution against, that this index was not held up as the be-all and end-all, but it was simply, for me, a very effective triangulation of the different impacts like government, infrastructure, and data availability and all of that. There are many other indices that could be used. India, for instance, didn't plan their AI journey based on any sort of index. They just used common sense and said, this is what we need to do. And when you look back, it actually is reflected in the index that they were very effective in rolling it out. So yeah, it's merely a framework. There are many other frameworks and many other indices that are extremely useful. I think the point that I want to drive home is that as a country, you need to have a national AI strategy that works for you, that's contextualized, and that takes into account many of the comments that were made here. Anthony is a good friend of mine. We used to fight terribly when he was at Treasury, but I could always win the fights because I had all the data. Is that right, Anthony? And since our collection efforts at SARS were based on our bonuses were based on our collection attainments, they always accused us of jipping the data. But that's on the side. But South Africa sits on an enormous amount of data. If you look at our education data, our health data, our SARS data, SARS can tell you who's working, when they're working, and for how long they'll be working. And when we presented that at a conference, the Statistician General went ballistic and said we're taking over his work. But that wasn't the intention. All I'm saying is that if you have a national strategy, AI strategy, then the other things should and will then fall into place. The availability to data, the availability to planning. And it's absolutely wonderful if you have an integrated view of a citizen. That again speaks to privacy, but if you know what your citizens are, where they are located, what their education levels are, what their health state, plan a lot better as a state. One of the interesting parts, and by way of concluding, is that when we had discussions with countries that rolled out single digital identity, actually is in a very good position to move forward faster because of our POPIO and our PAPIA acts that we have already in place. So yes, we are not in too far behind. We are well positioned. It's almost like we have to take the baton and we have to just finish the lap, you know? Yeah. So that's
Thank you. A round of applause for Randall and our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come to the end. Let me ask Charles Morito, who is head of government affairs and public policy for Sub-Sahara Africa, to do a vote of thanks for us. which you will do in 30 seconds.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think that one of the great things of having this gathering is all the different perspectives and point of views that are coming out of this. And in essence, this is supposed to be the start of a conversation that we continue. The Internet Academy is not designed to be a one-off whereby we gather, leave, and never talk again. So I want to urge you to continue this conversation with us. You'll have our contact information. You get to interact with each other so that we can continue this as we continue to develop the different policies. Prof, I'm going to take a little bit more than 30 seconds because I do want to leave you with 3 thoughts. But before I get to the 3 thoughts, Professor Khan, Android, as you use, is the way forward. Keep using it. It is absolutely the best. And Dr. Randall, one of the things that really struck me on your conversation is around this piece about debt. And one of the key challenges that we're facing on debt that we're not discussing is actually the depreciation of our currencies. And we need to really think about how we talk about that, because that is actually increasing dramatically the cost of debt repayments without even anyone taking up more debt, right? Because this debt is anchored on US dollars. But the 3 things that I wanted to leave you with, and the thoughts are around the potential for Africa. By 2050, we're going to be 1 in 4 people will be right here on the continent. By 2050, 1/3 of the world's workforce will be right here on the continent. That's 27 years from now. How do we develop a skilled workforce that is ready to service the world? And most of them to actually stay right here on the continent so that we can be able to reap the benefits of that income that's coming in. We don't need to send our youth to Japan to build those Toyotas and Hondas. Let those companies actually set up shop right here on the continent so that we can be able to actually benefit and reap and service the world. And the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is one of those opportunities that we can be able to leverage so that we don't need to build Toyota plants across every single country. We don't need to open an office of Google across every single country. However, if we have the right free flow of data, of labor, passports, I know that some of my colleagues in Nigeria were not able to make it today because they couldn't get their visas on time. We need to start integrating the continent so that we can be able to work better together. Absolutely. We have the EU, which allows people to free flow across Europe. We have the AU, yet people cannot crisscross across the continent. So we need to think about that, the potential. The challenges that we have, skills, I mentioned that, right? How do we continue to build on that? Connectivity, we cannot be able to really service the world if people cannot be able to get online. We only have about, on average, less than 10% of Africa's population are connected and have proper access to the internet. So let's be able to really help them be able to take advantage of what digital can provide. And then fragmentation, and I mentioned that especially around the policies of visas and free flow of labor and people across the continent, which leads me to the last point of policies, and that's why we're here today. When it comes to policies, we need to really think about how is technology focused on public good? Let's ask ourselves, what are we trying to solve for as we build these policies and write these policies? Because policies unto themselves are not really important. I actually go a bit further. I work for a technology company, but I like to be contrarian and say, I don't care about technology for technology's sake, right? Jason may, because he's really working on building on that technology. Yeah. What I really care about is what does that technology do for the good of Africans and for the good of people in the world. And one of the things that excites me about Google is we actually have a whole division that's called Tech and Society, that's led by none other than James Manyika, our son of Africa. And this is really looking at that intersection, the good that it can do. And that's why we showed those 5 different examples today, because we really anchor the work that we do on solving people's problems. With that, I thank you again for being here today. I do want to say that later on this afternoon, we will have a closed session for those of you who've registered. And lastly, we've spoken a lot about ChatGPT. I do want to throw in Bard, which is our own, and encourage you to use it a lot because it can be able to guide you, especially even around this building. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Well, thank you.